brother Alvin that has long since slept, and marveled how it was that he had obtained an inheritance in that kingdom, as he had not been baptized.
He sees his own brother, whom he loved, in the condition of exaltation, and marvels, how can this be? That would quicken him and rejoice him as perhaps nothing else could. And when you know the background of his family ties, that's the kernel then of what comes to be known later as the idea of proxy ordinances, baptism for the dead and salvation for the dead. A merciful, compassionate, and powerful doctrine. And he would say later, perfectly consistent with a God who is a God of justice and a God of care, but revolutionary in its time.
March 27, 1836. More than 1,000 saints gathered for the dedication of the temple.
Therefore sanctify yourselves, that your minds become single to God. And that day will come when we shall see him. For he will unveil his face unto you, and that shall be in his own time, in his own way, and according to his own will.
The completion of the temple was a season of rejoicing.
Great manifestations of power were witnessed in the Kirtland Temple. Elizabeth Ann Whitney.
I saw the power of God as it was on the day of Pentecost. The angels of God rested upon the temple, and we heard their voices singing heavenly music.
Zebedee Coltrane. There we had the gift of prophecy, the gift of tongues, and wonderful manifestations of the healing power. Lorenzo Snow.
All felt that they had a foretaste of heaven. Daniel Tyler.
A little girl came to my door and in wonder called me out, exclaiming, "The meeting is on top of the house." I went out of the door, and there I saw on the temple angels clothed in white, covering the roof from end to end. This was in broad daylight in the afternoon. Presendia Huntington.
1 week later, on April 3rd, an event of singular importance occurred.
The veil was taken from our minds, and the eyes of our understanding were opened. We saw the Lord standing upon the breastwork of the pulpit. His countenance shone above the brightness of the sun, and his voice was as the sound of the rushing of great waters, saying, "Lift up your heads and rejoice, for behold, I have accepted this house, and this is the beginning of the blessing which shall be poured out upon the heads of my people."
The great spiritual outpourings of 1836 were followed by great trials. In the fall, Joseph and the brethren laid a plan to get the church and its members out of debt by forming a bank of their own. But unable to get state approval, they formed the Kirtland Safety Society Anti-Banking Company. In 1837, a financial crisis swept the nation. Hundreds of banks failed, including this church-sponsored venture. About 200 shareholders suffered losses, as well as merchants, farmers, and others in the community who accepted printed banknotes.
I put $1,000 of gold.
Financial problems led many to apostasy. Joseph found himself in increasing peril. Numerous charges were raised against him in the courts. Some of his closest friends turned against him. Opposition became so bitter that Joseph and his family were forced to leave Kirtland. In January 1838, he rode out of Kirtland for the last time, leaving behind the temple for which so much had been sacrificed.
Elder Rigdon and I were obliged to flee, as did the apostles and prophets of old. As Jesus said, when they persecute you in one city, flee to another.
In Missouri, W. Phelps, David and John Whitmer, and Oliver Cowdery were brought before the High Council accused of selling their lands in Jackson County when they had received specific direction otherwise. Phelps was deeply offended by the accusation. The council was convinced that W. Phelps was in rebellion. Oliver Cowdery openly rejected their authority.
Desperate, hot-headed, power-seeking, ignorant men will drive the intelligent to declare their unbelief to an astonished world. Oliver Cowdery.
On Independence Day, Sidney Rigdon delivered an address which became known as the Salt Sermon.
Do we not have the same rights and privileges as other men? Ye are the salt of the earth. But if the salt have lost his savor, it is good for nothing but to be cast off and trodden under the foot of men.
Oliver Cowdery and I, as well as several others, felt the discourse was directed at us. It seemed a veiled threat, and fearing for our safety, we left far west a few days later.
In autumn?
Tensions turned to open hostility in Gallatin in early August. During a close election, some of the old citizens tried to prevent the Mormons from voting.
Get out of here!
Mob violence continued. When 3 church members were taken prisoner, the Far West Militia was sent to rescue them. In that confrontation, known as the Battle of Crooked River, several men were killed, including Apostle David Patton. Governor Boggs, reacting to exaggerated reports, issued an executive order.
The Mormons must be treated as enemies and must be exterminated or driven from the state if necessary. Their outrages are beyond description. Governor Lilburn W. Boggs.
3 days later, a mob attacked the quiet community of Hawn's Mill. 17 men and boys were killed. Joseph was arrested and taken into custody.
As for your leaders, do not imagine for a moment that they will be delivered, or that you will see their faces again. Their fate is fixed. Their die is cast. Their doom is sealed. General Samuel Clark.
The order was given to shoot Joseph and the others in the town square. Alexander Donovan refused.
It is cold-blooded murder. I will not obey your order, and if you execute these men, I will hold you responsible before an earthly tribunal. So help me God. Alexander Donovan.
But someone was willing to betray them.
As a special witness of the state, I depose and swear that Sidney Rigdon and Joseph Smith said they meant to resist the law, and if a sheriff came after them, they would kill him.
Why would you sign such an affidavit? You helped send a man you loved, a man you knew was a prophet of God, to a filthy prison for one of the most trying times